the mission of Centro Campesino is to improve the lives of the migrant and immigrant communities or Latino communities in rural Minnesota. And we do this through community organizing, advocacy, and education. So these three last components of our mission statement really is, kind of like the everyday situation or everyday lives of the immigrant workers, not only in Owatonna, but in the region as a whole. There are definitely situations where community organizing, collective power, collective engagement is necessary in order to fix or improve certain situations for the community, whether it's discrimination, whether it's racism, whether it's racial profiling, or whether it's a labor dispute where immigrants are being treated as second-class worker, or they're being retaliated against given their status or given their color. And so, in the community organizing aspect, there is definitely a lot of needs, and there's definitely a lot of different situations that every family goes through. I think it will be really impossible for me or for anyone to make it as one single issue. There's definitely a compilation of different cases that we either see, deal with, or hear about throughout the different communities. And again, it can range from something domestically in the house to something that happened to a 7-8-year-old at the school district. And so the issues really range, but the main areas that we see a lot of damage, it's in the educational system. There's definitely a racial inequity that happens, and that a lot of our students are not able to really capitalize in the resources that schools are offering to the other students or to the rest of the students. There's definitely a lack of enforcement and lack of access to enforcement in the labor area that, again, a lot of our people don't have the time, don't have the language, don't have the tools, don't have the resources to also just to access this, and on top of it to really follow up through the systems for them to not really be as abused or to put themselves in situations where they can be abused by their employers. And then finally, like the social issues that happen in each town. Every community is different. Every community has a different environment and a different behavior that they do towards their immigrant community. I know that Owatonna it's a pretty good town for the majority of the immigrants that will live and work here. There's other places where there is a sense of a hostility towards the immigrants, given the historical events that happen in each town, or just it's something that the larger community tends to do and tends to approve. In terms of education, we try to make sure that everybody knows what it's available to them, how they can use it, how they can access it. But at the same time, there's also this distrust in certain institutions, because a lot of the times it takes a lot of time to deal with. Not all the times people are doing the right thing, and they end up being in a way punished for lacking or missing something. I think a good example would be something currently that's happening. It's a person who was on the state health insurance, but she was lacking a proof of residence. They requested that she handed a copy of a bill that she would have. Well, it turns out she has absolutely no bills. Her phone she pays monthly, her rent she pays monthly cash, and she gets a paycheck. So she has no phone bill, no internet, no television, no car bill, no insurance bill, which for a lot of situations that's a good thing. That's a productive citizen. And so the system, it's not allowing her to continue with her health insurance because she has not billed. It's a document that says that she owes to someone. And we try sending a copy of her check, which is, a checkbook. Banks are a valid institution, and they said that it didn't work. So we have to have, the landlord write up a statement which says, yes, this person has rented from me from this month to this month, this is the arrangement, sign and send. And so, those type of situations don't really help and this is someone who happens to be a U.S. citizen. We're not talking about someone who's an immigrant, who doesn't speak English, who doesn't have certain documents. This is a U.S. citizen that's been here for all her life, and speaks English, has all the proper tools, but just how things work that don't really support the needs. And so a lot of community members distrust this type of systems, and that's another thing that we need to address. And so finally, the advocacy piece, the immigrant community as a whole has a lot of different needs that can be covered by legislation, whether it's local, state, or federal. And so we try to also educate them, how this works, how it looks like, but also what are the pieces and places where they can participate, where they can engage to make sure that this happens the way they want to see it. For example, we do workshops where people learn how a bill becomes law. Make sure that they know every step, make sure that they know and understand that every step they also can have a voice, they can say what they feel, and it's a good way to become civically engaged. And at the same time, we all are advocating for our own needs, and all of us are advocating at the same time for the same reasons and for the same goals. Labor violations and labor abuses are unfortunately it's a historical addiction almost. It's a historical kind of abusive relationship that this country has. Back from Civil War and prior to that, we've seen how those systems have been set up in a way that the capitalists always will end up winning, regardless of whatever regulations, whatever laws, whatever processes they tell us that are available to us. It's almost impossible to really make them effective unless they also make some changes for the people at the top. But the way that we see it here, and this is maybe a little bit of my personal views, is that when it comes to this type of relations, one of the biggest things that happens is that most of the broader community, or in this case the white community or Caucasian community, have a certain detachment from the issue of labor or labor abuses. Mostly because, a lot of these generations grew up learning about, modern slavery, labor abuses, places of minimum wage and people living in barracks from third world countries. This is something that they learn in their history books. This is something that they learn in their university classes, how people are treated in different countries. But they were never shown that this also happens here in their own backyard. And so when this issue is presented to them in such a crude way and in such a reality check manner, they tend to detach themselves from the issue by saying, yes, but that's something that happens to them. It's not happening to us, and it doesn't have any effect on my life, even though it does. Because, it's the simple saying that everybody does well when everybody does well. If immigrant workers are being treated well, that, has a repercussion in the community, how they feel around the community, how much trust they have in the community, how much their kids are going to trust their community. And so, that system and that the way it plays, it's really difficult for us because it's really hard to gain allies in that type of struggle. One, because some of them, I said, they have the detachment issue. And two is because, especially in the small communities, personal relationships and personal friendships are very, very important. So I can go and, for example, present a very good case of really bad working conditions, let's say at a church group. And they all might be outraged because of the situation, how it's happening, the fact that it's happening in their town. But there's a chance they also might know the owner of the farm, of the factory, of the company. Their kids might go to school with the same kids. Some of them, probably went to school together with the brother, the sibling. And at the end of the day, they don't want to risk that, connection that they have with the other person because they feel that that is kind of maybe against their morals or something else, and so they rather say yes, I will help you on your campaign and on your efforts, but the fact that they're also saying I will help you, that again reinforces the detachment, because helping is again saying that's your problem, I'll help you solve it, it's not my problem. For us it's more important and a lot more powerful for people to join us, for people to support, and for people to come in as someone that they see themselves as, yes, I am part of this struggle because of these reasons, and that creates a different way of presenting what the reality of the town is, and how these problems that can be taken from a small company can actually become for the benefit of the entire community.
So is the issue getting the laws that are on the books enforced?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's getting sometimes it is, yes, definitely. I mean, some laws are very hard to enforce, and there's very little enforcement. There's a lot of requirements, and the timetables are very long. One of the examples that one of the things that we suffer a lot with, for example, is that the Department of Labor caseworkers of wage theft will not take a case if someone was being paid in cash, for example. The person needs to make a claim against an employer who was paying them with a payroll check. So there's a lot of cases that we see of hog farms, dairy farms, turkey farms, construction workers that we're gonna get paid for 2-3 weeks or a month of their labor's worth in cash, but the farmer can just say I don't have the money now, and there is very little that we can do to recuperate that money. There is no leverage that the worker has against the employer. There is no leverage that we have against the employee. And the law, which is the Department of Labor, says, sorry, you can't bring your claim to us because we don't deal with those type of issues. So, a lot of people, I'm not saying that everybody's out there, targeting immigrants to abuse them, but the ones that are doing it and are doing it effectively.
They know the law, the enforcement well enough to avoid getting caught.
Yep. I know that sometimes, they'd rather pay the fine than to pay the workers because the fine will be smaller. It doesn't help. It's not really, it's like you're giving a fork to eat a soup. It doesn't really help you. You can only get so much.
So what do you see for abuses?
We see a lot of, it really depends on the industries, but the most common abuse that we're seeing right now is wage theft. A lot of the times, because of the good stereotype of the Latino worker, that they're always, in time, they always work hard, they always want the extra hours. A lot of people are, for example, requested to be at their shifts 15 to 30 minutes earlier, but they don't clock in until this, let's say 6 a.m. So in the meantime, you get up at, let's say 5 to get ready, make your lunch, make it, to your workplace safe and, not to be rushed. And you're just basically hanging out there for 30 minutes that you're not getting paid for. And then on top of that, what happens is that your end of your shift, let's say it's 6 p.m., but there's still, a couple things that you're supposed to clean, clear out, put away. They require you to go clock out at 6 and then finish whatever other tasks you have on hand. So, your shift actually went from 5 a.m. to, let's say, 8 p.m., but you only got paid 12 hours. And that's very common in a lot of industries. That's one of them. There's other places where, they don't use the clock, they record on paper, and they tell you, I can only pay you 40 hours. And then again, if that person worked 45, it's only 40 hours. So we see a lot of those cases, and in the agriculture industry, it's prominent where these type of situations happen. We also see a lot of accidents in the agriculture industry. We've seen many cases of people being kicked by cows, for example, in the dairy industry, where the company didn't have workers' compensation, where they have health insurance, where the workers were not taken to the clinic, proper hospital care in time, where they were, threatened if they did go to work to the hospital and didn't come back to work the next day, they wouldn't have a job. There's been cases where, they are given the option, you can either go to the hospital or you can, get paid, whatever you want, because a lot of the employers are not responsible, are not really fulfilling the responsibility with their workers when it comes to these accidents. We see some cases where, for example, if machinery, product, or something inside a farm gets broken or deteriorates, sometimes workers are deducted from their paycheck to cover for this. So we see a lot of those. And this year, actually, I saw a lot of cases of construction workers that were not paid for weeks, cases a month of their labor, because the company was paying, it was a contract of a subcontract, and they were gonna get paid cash, and the company just said, no more money, it's out. So it's pretty much what we see in a lot of cases.
And do you have any sense of how much is going on that you aren't seeing? I mean, is it likely that if something pretty awful's happening that someone will come into your office and talk about it, or does most of it kind of get covered up?
I will say that that's a very good question, because that's something that we want to start, with measuring. I don't know how. I always say we don't get 100% of the cases, in our doors. The other thing too is that there's many different barriers even for us as a nonprofit, and the work that we do. There's still several barriers that people have to go through in order to get a hold of us. First, it's the fear piece, which is the biggest one, and it's the most immediate one. If something happens to you, most likely your employer is going to tell you not to tell anyone, or you'll lose your job. For a lot of people, that's their main source of income. So once, they have conquered that fear trap of I shouldn't tell anyone because, I'm going to lose everything, and they learn that there are protections, and there are people that can help them, and there are, systems of support that they can use in order to get out of that situation, then they make the step of contacting someone, and that can take a few months before they do that, and then possibly eventually those cases will get to us, which then we try to work the best out of each situation. But I will say that there's at least I will say it's I don't know, I'll say 40 to 60% of cases that go unreported to us. I would say we get in between almost the same, kind of 40 to 60, depending on how you see it. Because there is definitely a lot of people, and there's people that are really secluded, very small farms in very small towns, where sometimes workers don't have, let's say, a car, they don't have a cell phone. It's very, very many things that they have to go past before they can reach someone out.
So it's sounding as if some of the biggest problems are with little operations.
Not really. Actually, no. It really depends on the industry, but I will be almost certain to say that a lot of our cases, the great majority of our cases, do come from larger operations. There are small farms and medium farms that are actually doing great things for immigrant workers. There are places that I know that are, excellent employers. They do and go beyond their part. They are paying well above, the market price. They are making sure their employees have a safe and clean house, for example, if provided. And they make sure that, their workers get X amount of days off to spend with their family or do holidays or rest. But I do know that a lot of the bigger the farm, the most likely there will be some labor issues there. Dairy farms are probably one of them. hog farms as well. Same goes for the meat packing industry as well. The bigger, the more issues.
Do you feel confident that once a worker comes to you with a problem, that it's going to be better for that worker than if he or she just put up with it? I mean, the worker's afraid. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to, I have no place to go. How grounded, how justified is that fear?
I don't know how justified it is, but in terms of grounded, it's one of those situations where you have to picture yourself in. You're new. Let's say you've been here for a year. You don't speak the language. Let's say you don't have documents, and so that already adds, some layers of fear because you can end up in a worse situation. And then on top of it, most people feel that laws are not there to protect them. Laws were not designed, they're not enforced, they're not being set up to protect them. So really, and then on top of this, you have, the boss telling you that if you do X, Y, and Z, you're gonna get in worse trouble. So it really is pretty well grounded for a lot of immigrants, and I'm not saying that it goes for everyone, but some of the cases that we do see, which there are a lot, it happens like that. In terms of making the situation better for a single worker, that's kind of where a lot of our time and resources go into. When a worker from company X comes and says, this is what's happening, our first goal is to first make sure that there are more people that also feel the same way and that also want to join into this struggle. Because if we solve one worker's problem, then he's going to tell the next one, the next one's going to come, then the next one's going to come, and we're only going to be doing casework. So we try to make sure that they understand, how collective power, in this case community organizing, could benefit not only him or her, but basically the entire labor force at whatever place they're working. And that's kind of like the hardest piece, because not everyone wants to join, not everyone wants to, not everyone's fed up yet in order to say, yes, I want to be part of this. So we always try to work with what we have available, and a lot of the times, we've seen cases where one worker struggled was the benefit for 100 of them, and everybody's happy. Some of them do, say thank you. Some of them, they just think that was, something that was supposed to happen. But I think once, a person has come here, had an issue, understood, what really the reality is for them, they either do better at their job because now they have different tools and resources, or, they move on and they'll find a place where they won't be as abused. And if they see, the signs, they will know exactly what's happening, and they're going to be able to speak up. It might sound like a cliche, but I think our youth do represent one of the biggest hopes. One is because they're growing up in a completely different environment that their parents did. They're understanding things at a very early age than their parents did. They dominate usually both languages. They have the educational advantage in some of the cases, not every case. But they also are becoming more aware of, how these issues or how these problems impacts them directly, their families, and how, the rest of the work that we're doing has a connection to it. So I think, in the long term, probably the youth are going to be the ones that are going to be able to make some of these struggles stronger, or make a lot of this work be shorter or less, because now we have kind of like a spread out increased capacity that, even though it's not being nature on an everyday basis, but it's kind of like an idea. Once that idea is put into your brain, it's really hard to get away. So if a high school kid that has learned what, for example, racism or discrimination in the school system looks like, they're going to be able to identify it somewhere else. and they might be, the people who say or do something about it.
So you mentioned some of what you're doing with youth, encouraging people to get their applications in and get them right and move on with their education and understand their educational options. Is there anything happening in the center to connect youth to it and its projects? And I mean, I think about the way you came in not a lot older than a youth.
Yeah.
You're running the place. There could be 50 people in the community around here with that kind of talent too. If they got hooked up, could multiply your power by 50.
That would be great.
Is there anything happening there?
Well, this year we started working, or maybe not working. We started to encourage our students more about doing internships with us, but with the intention that they know they have a kind of a vision of how that fits into their plan, because a lot of students, and I speak of what it could have been me. If I could have been a student who already has a track, this is where I'm going, this is what I want. And yes, while I like and appreciate the work that the organization does, I'm going to volunteer and once in a while help. But it's not something that I can see that it will benefit me in the long term. So, we're being more strategic and, talking with our students. So, for example, we have right now 2 of them doing internships with us. One of them wants to be an immigration attorney. So she's learning everything that we do in our immigration program. And she's great. She helps a lot. She's also learning about other different tasks. But, that's kind of where we are investing some of our time in those students that say, I'm interested, for example, in there's one person that's interested in the health part. So she's going to be, here beginning in January, more closely working to the health program because eventually she wants to be a doctor. So, that's kind of like where, we're targeting students, but, there's always opportunities for anyone, basically, youth, adults. We're always, open to have and form committees and to, give projects, provide, support for different projects. I had people that, have come and approached us to see if we could almost like house or incubate a small project of, conversations, for example, around mental health. And I always say, yes, but I don't really have the time to do it. So I can work with you guys to make sure that you have the structure for that to run on its own. So it's definitely something that we're doing, and right now we're also working closer with a group in Austin of college students at the community college there. So that's also increasing kind of our capacity and outreach and our understanding of what its best practices for the youth these days as well.
Is there good Spanish language communication out to the whole range, those farmers, farm workers in small farms, and how's that going?
Honestly, in rural Minnesota, the communication piece is very, very small. I could definitely use a lot of more resources. I know there is a couple of, newspapers that run across the state that are Spanish language only, which a lot of people use as part of their, information and news sources. The problem with those is that one, they're very Twin Cities based. So a lot of the news, are about Twin Cities events, Twin Cities stuff, and national. So they don't really see themselves in the news. There's not the case of someone in Austin or Alberta or Owatonna. They rarely see that. It comes, I think a couple times a month only, if not once a month. And then, so for sometimes, you have to drive to certain places in order to get it. So it's not readily accessible. And, radio stations, for example, they can only do so much. They can only reach so much as well. TV stations, I know that Univision now has a Minneapolis, outlet or branch, but I don't think we get it in rural Minnesota, and even if we do, you know, we don't get all of the programming. And so there's definitely a limited resources that we can work with.
So, farm worker working, say, with pigs, they'd have a radio on in the barn. Is there a Spanish language channel?
There's a Spanish language music channel, yes.
And does your message go out in the news part or some part of that?
Very, very rare. It's expensive, and you know, we can only do it a few times a year. So the radio, or at least the main radio station, we only use it when there is very important, very urgent messages to pass on to the community.
How about television? Do the migrant folks have televisions?
Most of them do, and most of them will actually have some kind of a cable connection.
Okay.
So that's, for us, that sometimes is a problem, and I'll tell you why. A lot of the times, you know, people, their main source of, for the Spanish-speaking community, usually their main source of information is Univision, the national chain. The problem with Univision is just like any other network, right? They only give you the blitz of the news, and then it's up to you to whether you know what's going on or you take what they tell you. And so in a lot of cases, you know, it hasn't happened lately, but they will hear something in the news that they don't know what it really means, so then they call us and be like, I heard this on the Univision, is this what's happening, is this real? Then we have to be like, no, this is part of a process, it's longer, and you know, you're only getting the beginning and you only got one sentence of it. And so that's a problem because it really creates more work than we need, and they're not doing their job of properly communicating news that are extremely relevant to the community. I mean, we see this a lot with the immigration issue. You know, something will happen in Congress, when Univision reports it, we get phone calls. Simple like that.
So, if you had the time and you had the channel, could you do, sitting right there, an accurate weekly news show? Here's how things look from Southwest Minnesota.
I think I could to a degree. You know, there's only so many things that, you know, could be relevant to. I mean, I think it will be, for us, and you know, unfortunately, given the nature of our work, it will have to be more of an educational and informational outlet rather than, you know, giving you the news. I mean, there's only so many news that, you know, I can't give them, you know, the score of the, you know, high school football team. But yeah, I think it will definitely help to have more access to the houses via either radio or television, or even the internet nowadays too. You know, we do encourage people to follow us on Facebook mostly, because most people go to our Facebook page than our website page, and we try to, you know, maintain it with good information of, you know, things that are happening that are important to them.
So the center is a kind of collecting point of good, relevant local news. Good information, good educational stuff. The problem is how to get it out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Deliver it.